I never thought it would happen to me, but my life turned upside down when I found out my wife cheated on me. I thought we had a happy marriage, with a strong bond built over years of love and trust. But one day, everything changed. I remember feeling confused and lost, wondering how my life had taken such a drastic turn. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved and trusted had betrayed me in such a way. It was like a punch in the gut, and it took me a while to come to terms with what had happened. At first, I tried to brush it off and pretend that everything was okay, but the hurt and pain were too much to ignore. I felt like I had lost a part of myself, and it was hard to see a way forward. Our relationship was going well until I noticed some changes in her behavior. She became distant, and I started to feel like something was off. She would spend more time on her phone than with me and seemed to be less interested in spending quality time together. At first, I thought it was just stress from work or other issues, but as time passed, the behavior continued. I started to feel like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. I tried talking to her about my concerns, but she brushed them off, saying everything was fine. Despite her reassurances, my gut told me something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I started to become suspicious of her activities, wondering if there was something she wasn't telling me. I decided to investigate and checked her phone. That's when I found messages from another man. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but as I read through the messages, it became clear that something was going on. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal. How could she do this to me? I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away for some guy she barely knew. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, I began to feel like something was off in our relationship. My wife had become distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. At first, I tried to brush off my suspicions, thinking that I was just being paranoid. But as time passed, her behavior became more erratic, and I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. She would spend more time on her phone than with me, and whenever I tried to talk to her, she would brush me off or seem disinterested. It was like I was living with a stranger, and I didn't know how to fix it. I began to wonder if there was someone else in her life, someone she was more interested in than me. I tried to talk to her about my concerns, but she would get defensive and say that I was overthinking things. Despite her reassurances, my suspicions grew, and I decided to investigate. I checked her phone, and that's when I found the messages from another man. It was like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. My worst fears had come true, and I felt like my world was crumbling around me. After finding the messages on my wife's phone, I knew I had to confront her. It was a difficult decision, but I couldn't ignore what I had discovered. I waited until she came home from work and asked to talk to her. I tried to remain calm, but my emotions were running high, and it was hard to keep my composure. I showed her the messages and asked her to explain what was going on. At first, she tried to deny everything, but I could tell that she was lying. As the conversation progressed, she eventually admitted to cheating on me with the man whose messages I had found. She was apologetic and claimed that it was a mistake, but I was devastated. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved and trusted had betrayed me in such a way. It was like a nightmare come true, and I didn't know how to move forward. After confronting my wife about the messages I had found on her phone, she eventually admitted to cheating on me with another man. It was a devastating confession that rocked my world and left me feeling lost and alone. She told me that it had been going on for several months and that she was sorry for what she had done. She claimed that it was a mistake and that she still loved me, but I didn't know if I could believe her. I was filled with a mix of emotions, including anger, sadness, and betrayal. It was like a part of me had died, and I didn't know how to move forward. It was a dark time in my life, and I hope that by sharing my experience, others going through a similar situation can find the strength to confront their own partners and find a way to move forward. After my wife's confession, I couldn't help but wonder who the other man was. I wanted to know everything about him, what he looked like, how they met, and what had led to their affair. I asked my wife to tell me everything she knew, and while it was difficult to hear, I wanted to understand the situation fully. She told me that she had met him at work and that they had grown close over time. They had shared personal information and had developed a strong emotional connection that eventually led to physical intimacy. I couldn't help but feel angry and betrayed by the other man. It was like he had come into my life and stolen my wife away from me. I wanted to confront him and let him know the pain he had caused me, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I tried to focus on my own healing and coming to terms with what had happened. I knew that I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I moved forward. Discovering that my wife had cheated on me was a devastating blow. It felt like my entire world had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to move forward. The betrayal I felt was profound. I had trusted my wife completely, and she had broken that trust in the most profound way possible. It was like a knife had been plunged into my heart, and I didn't know how to pull it out. I felt like a fool for not realizing what was happening sooner. I had always believed that our relationship was strong and that we would face any challenge together. But now, I felt like I had been living in a dream world. After my wife's confession, I knew that I needed space and time to process my emotions and figure out what I wanted for my future. I couldn't bear to stay in our home and look at the memories of our life together, knowing that it had all been a lie. So, I decided to move out. It was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made, but I knew that it was necessary for my own mental health and well-being. Finding a new place to live was a challenge, but I eventually found a small apartment that I could call my own. It was a big change from our spacious home, but it was a fresh start that I desperately needed. Moving out was a necessary step in my healing process, and I hope that by sharing my experience, others going through a similar situation can find the strength to make the tough decisions that are necessary for their own healing and recovery. As I began to come to terms with the reality of my situation, I knew that divorce was inevitable. It was a painful decision, but it was necessary to move forward with my life. Divorce is never easy, and the process was emotionally draining. It felt like my entire life was being dismantled, piece by piece. I had to face the reality that the life I had built with my wife was over, and that our future would be separate. There were many legal and financial decisions to be made, and each one felt like another gut-wrenching blow. I had to come to terms with the fact that I would lose a significant portion of our shared assets, but I knew that it was worth it to move on and start anew. Throughout the divorce process, I tried to focus on taking care of myself and my emotional well-being. I sought the support of friends and family and found comfort in talking to others who had gone through similar experiences. One of the most difficult parts of my divorce was the legal battle that ensued. Dividing up assets and property was complicated, and my ex-wife and I had very different ideas about what was fair and just. The legal battle was emotionally draining, and it felt like a constant reminder of the pain and betrayal that had led us to this point. There were disagreements over everything from who would get the house to who would pay for our children's college education. At times, it felt like the lawyers were the only ones who were benefiting from the process. I was drained emotionally, financially, and mentally. However, I knew that I had to fight for what was fair and what was mine. The legal battle was one of the most challenging aspects of my divorce, but it was a necessary step in the process. I hope that by sharing my experience, others going through a similar situation can find the strength to fight for what is theirs and come out on the other side with their dignity and integrity intact. The aftermath of my divorce was a challenging time in my life, but it was also a time of growth and self-discovery. After years of being in a relationship, it was difficult to adjust to being single again, but I knew that I needed to focus on my own healing and well-being. One of the most important things I did was to seek therapy. Talking to a professional about my experiences helped me to process my emotions and work through the pain of my divorce. It also gave me the tools and strategies I needed to move forward and start living again. I also found support from my friends and family. They were there for me when I needed them the most, and their love and encouragement helped me to stay strong and positive. I made a conscious effort to take care of myself physically, emotionally, and mentally. I started eating healthier, exercising regularly, and making time for hobbies that brought me joy. Healing after a divorce is a process, and it takes time and effort to move forward. But by taking care of ourselves and finding healthy ways to cope with our emotions, we can come out on the other side stronger and more resilient. After going through the emotional roller coaster of divorce and the healing process that followed, I began to look towards the future and started to see the possibilities of new beginnings. Dating after a divorce can be daunting, but it was also a chance to rediscover myself and what I wanted in a partner. I learned to be more intentional in my approach to relationships and to take the time to get to know someone before jumping into anything too quickly. I also found new opportunities in my career and hobbies. I took on new projects, pursued passions I had put on hold during my marriage, and discovered new interests that brought me fulfillment and joy. New beginnings can also bring new challenges, and in this chapter, I'll discuss the obstacles I faced and the lessons I learned. I'll talk about the importance of setting boundaries and taking things at my own pace, as well as the importance of staying true to my values and priorities. Ultimately, new beginnings allowed me to create a life that was truly my own. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it to discover new joys, new passions, and new opportunities that brought me happiness and fulfillment. One of the most difficult challenges that I faced after my divorce was learning to forgive my ex-wife for the pain and betrayal that I had experienced. However, I knew that holding on to anger and resentment was not healthy for me and that forgiveness was the key to moving on with my life. Forgiveness is not something that happens overnight. It's a process that requires time, patience, and a willingness to let go of the past. For me, forgiveness started with acknowledging the hurt and pain that I had experienced and accepting that I couldn't change what had happened. I also had to learn to separate forgiveness from reconciliation. Forgiving my ex-wife didn't mean that I wanted to reconcile with her or forget what had happened. It simply meant that I was no longer holding on to anger and resentment towards her. I found that forgiveness was also a process of self-discovery. It allowed me to reflect on my own actions and mistakes in the relationship and to take responsibility for my own role in the breakdown of our marriage. Finally, I'll share how forgiveness allowed me to move forward with my life and find a sense of peace and closure. It freed me from the emotional burden of holding on to anger and resentment and allowed me to open myself up to new relationships and experiences. Forgiveness is a powerful tool for healing and growth, and it allowed me to find a sense of freedom and happiness after my divorce. In this chapter, I hope to inspire and encourage others to consider the power of forgiveness in their own lives. Closure is an important part of the healing process after a divorce. It allows us to make sense of what has happened, come to terms with the end of the relationship, and move forward with our lives. Closure starts with acceptance. I had to accept that my marriage had ended and that I couldn't change the past. This wasn't easy, but it was necessary to move forward with my life. Letting go of the past was also crucial to finding closure. I had to let go of any anger, resentment, or regret that I was holding on to and focus on the present moment. This allowed me to create a new vision for my future and set new goals for myself. Closure can also come in different forms. For some, closure may come through a conversation with their ex-partner, while for others, closure may come through closure rituals or other symbolic acts. Finally, I'll share how closure allowed me to create a new chapter in my life and find happiness and fulfillment after my divorce. It allowed me to move forward with a sense of purpose and clarity, and to create a life that was truly my own. Finding closure after a divorce is not easy, but it's necessary for healing and growth. In this chapter, I hope to provide insights and strategies that can help others find closure and move forward with their lives. After the end of a marriage, it can be difficult to know how to move forward with life. In this final chapter, I'll share my experiences of finding a new path and moving forward with purpose and optimism. Moving forward starts with creating a new vision for your life. I had to ask myself, what do I want for myself and my future? This allowed me to set new goals and create a plan for achieving them. I also had to embrace change and be open to new experiences. This meant stepping out of my comfort zone and trying new things, whether it was a new hobby or a new job opportunity. Another important aspect of moving forward is taking care of yourself. This means prioritizing your physical and mental health, practicing self-care, and making time for activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. Finally, I'll share how moving forward allowed me to find happiness and fulfillment in new ways. It allowed me to let go of the past and embrace the present moment, and to create a life that was truly my own. Moving forward after a divorce is not easy, but it's possible. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to embrace change and new opportunities. In this final chapter, I hope to provide insights and inspiration for those who are navigating their own journey towards a new beginning.